Hello, beautiful listeners and viewers. I'm so excited to be here with my beautiful friend from America, Michael Lennox. Thank you for joining.
It's so much my pleasure. I love doing these things with you, Tiarni. I do.
Thank you. Oh, well, I mean, I have coined us the joy astrologers, so that will always stick because of our gushy joy constantly and secretly wanting everyone to become their own private astrologers in their lives. We're the same. And I'm so excited. Michael has some great things to talk about with the nodes and the eclipses. So this is a really great episode to grab a pen and paper because he's going to be talking around the cycles. And, of course, we're going to go into all of the juicy stuff for 2023 around the nodal shift as well. So the first question that I've been asking everyone, of course, is not only, introducing this beautiful man, Michael Lennox, but also wanting to dive into the brain and go, what's the favorite thing, which is always hard, but the favorite thing about astrology that you love the most? Is there an answer?
My favorite, oh my
yes.
God. Oh my God. I just got emotional. I have a pal, Monique Ruffin. She was a student of mine at one point. Now she's sort of taken on her own. And she and I, we're good friends. And she and I'm up at 4 a.m. I go to bed at 8 and I'm up at 4, and she's up early as well. And I will say that when the things get rough astrologically, I can expect my phone to ring almost every day, or hers to ring every day. And one of the things that we routinely say to each other, we say two things to each other every day that we have these kinds of interactions that are my favorite thing about astrology. One is that the gratitude of we get each other's experience because we understand the astrology of it. She'll say to me, I can't speak to anyone else about this but you'll get it. And so one of the things I love about astrology from that perspective is like the shorthand that astrology gives me to immediately contextualize my experience. And this leads to the second thing, which was, if I didn't have astrology, I would assume I was out of my fucking mind.
Yes.
So,
and if you're not watching the video, he took his glasses off. He stared directly at us, right. And that was a moment. That was a fucking moment.
Because the truth is, my little body is so energetically sensitive, emotionally sensitive, and I have spent 59 years busting through the impulses to hold back so that I could live freely and fully out loud, which includes being expressive, emotional, angry, sad, and grieving, just as a matter of letting the energy flow through me. I've learned how to do that through astrology by understanding flow and movement, and not to grab onto any given idea that I'm feeling in a moment, because it's going to pass. And astrology teaches me that. So it's the context for the experience and the idea that I'm not actually insane. I'm just a person in a body in a fast moving, crazy energetic soup.
I love that answer. That's, every astrologer, like I said, it was a loaded question because astrologers love everything.
Feels like a loaded question.
Yes, it is. Sorry, but you've all answered it so deliciously. And I'm so with you there. One of my best friends is an astrologer and we talk pretty much every day. And again, other people who don't understand the language and what's actually going on just don't understand like this shorthand. Like you said, it's this shorthand to go, well, this is happening here. And sometimes it's just a matter of going, oh, Uranus is doing this, and I'm just exposing myself, not to be judged or anything else, but just to be heard, because the astrologer understands what that transit is like. And I totally 1,000,000% agree with that. That is definitely one of my favorite things as well. We need that, don't we? Okay, I'm going to, as usual, hand it over to Michael. And, I've asked, obviously, everyone knows I've asked all my astrologers, what did they want to talk about? And Michael talked, just asked nodes and eclipses. And I'm like, yes. And he sort of
I'm remembering too that's what we talked about last year.
It is. So this is just the thing. And of course, you're going to give a different perspective as well, because if everyone's already listened to Amber's chat, she talked about the nodal shift too. But again, it's so different. You're going to be talking about the cycles.
We all have a different take.
Yeah.
I love the nodes of the moon. I love the nodes of the moon as an astrologer. It's my favorite thing about astrology. No,
is the nodes of the moon.
No, that's not true. But the nodes of the moon, because they are so directly tied up. Now I'm talking about nodes of the moon in a natal chart. Your nodes in the chart are so profoundly tied up with the flow of arc through a life, where south node is the past, north node is the future, or the dharma, karma, dharma. I like to say that the south node is the first breath you take in, and you exhale it at your north node, and then you're dead. Like, life is a breath. Because what's the first thing we do when we're born? We breathe in. And what's the first thing or the last thing we do is we breathe out at the end. And south node and north node describe that process of that there is an entrance point and there's an exit point and a purpose. And we can use the placement of the nodes, the signs and the houses that they're in, and the interactions with other planets in the chart to have a conversation with a person about their karma, dharma, past and future, and maybe even where they're at in that journey at any given moment when we do a reading or a session. But I can also, I could go into a group of people who don't know anything about astrology, but who are spiritually minded and have a teaching of value talking about the archetype of their south node and the planet the house placement and the sign placement. So I just think that they're rich and juicy for the individual to understand their journey. And then, of course, there's the transiting nodes that create the eclipses. So I'm assuming your people know this, but I'll sort of give the quick sort of my version of teaching is that there's this circle of the orbit of the Earth around the sun. And just imagine that fixed sort of ellipse of energy. But then there's this little one that sort of sits on top of it, which is the moon around the Earth. So you got a little circle crossing over a big circle. And where they intersect, if you were standing on the Earth looking up at, there's that Earth circle, and there's that moon circle, and they're crossing each other. That's the north node. And if I turn around, that's the south node. Right. So those angles of energy, when the sun gets near one of them, the light breaks, we have our eclipses. I think one of the reasons why I like talking to you about eclipses and the nodes is because I do have this sense that the miracle of that the sun is sort of 400 times further from us than the moon is, but the moon is 400 times smaller. So that's why when the moon comes in front of the sun, it blacks it out perfectly. That alone tells me that eclipses and consciousness in the form of life on Earth have to be connected. So I think that amplifies the power of the nodes and what they mean when they are transiting through signs, as they are now. North node transiting through Taurus, where the dharma and the north node pull forward is towards love and more grounded sort of sensibility in that Venus ruled Taurus. So we get there by moving away from the south node, the Scorpio, the death sort of experience.
And also, just a side note, I want to say that the other reason we constantly talk about nodes, we realized that we talked nodes last year as well, is because my north node hits your sun. So
yes, that's right. So we are connected
the
in that way.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
Right. So eclipses and all lunations create this 19-year cycle. It's called the Saros cycle, Saros, and it is so mathematically complex and annoying. But I can break it down in a simple way. By reminding everybody of the 4 pillars of just the actual lunar cycle itself. That at the beginning of the lunar cycle, sun and moon together, new moon, we begin. It's the alpha omega, begin again. When the moon is moved 90 degrees, that's the first quarter moon. It's a crisis where unconscious and conscious in alignment, that's a good time to set intentions because they're in alignment. And then there's an at odds moment a week later where the sun and the moon square each other. First quarter moon is the intention is either going to fail or thrive at that moment. And then we have the full moon a week later, the culmination point where we harvest the benefit, get rid of what doesn't serve. And then at the third quarter moon, a week later, again, now the sun and the moon are at odds again, but the moon has already moved a bit. So we have some wisdom. We have 3 weeks of wisdom. And that crisis in the third quarter moon, we call the disseminating moon, where we are tested, if you will, to put out into the world the wisdom of what we've learned. And then we're back again at the next new moon. So those 4 pillars actually exist in the 19-year Saros cycle, where an eclipse, any eclipse anywhere, will have a crisis moment, a fullness moment, a dissemination moment, and then a completion moment. So, but not in a 28-day cycle, in a 19-year cycle. So what I want to teach about this to people who don't know much about astrology, I point out that we're all born with the south node and the north node in a particular place in our chart, and we call that our path of karma dharma. But it's like, you just think of that birth moment as like the new moon moment, the first initial, like, here I am, I'm here. I'm going to use increments of 5 because 19 divided by 4 is 4
just
point
easier.
blah, blah, blah.
Yeah,
It's easier to be like,
yeah.
So what happens?
I mean, your Mercury in Virgo may want to make it completely perfect.
I do, honey, it does. Thank you very
relax.
much. I want to be precise, but yeah. So when we're 5 years old, which is one pillar through this 19-year cycle, the first one is at 5, where we're either going to fail or thrive. That's the crisis of what happens in development right around 5 and 6 years old. We're not quite at abstract thinking yet, but we're also not toddling. We can walk. We are communicative. We're ready for school. We're ready to leave the house, where we're either going to thrive or fail to thrive, right? In kindergarten, right? Right. But it makes sense, right? That the first 5 years, you're sort of sequestered. And at 5 years, you're shoved into the world to fail or thrive outside of the house. Mm-hmm. Then at 10 years, you're 10 years old. You are now fully formed in the brain with abstract thinking. That happens at around 8 years old in the world of psychology. But you haven't hit puberty yet. Thank God. So you have this fullness of your expression, which is you fully formed, ready to be an independent thinker and being at 10 years old with abstract thinking, all but not the crisis that comes at 15 years, the third pillar, puberty. Crisis where the emphasis is on disseminating out into the world who you are. The crisis of puberty is making you into, transforming your body so that you can disseminate, move out into the world and do your life. And then at 20, you start again. That's when you have your first, what's called nodal reset. So now we'll go back to 19. So when you're 19 years old, your nodes will come right back to where they were when you were born. And then we have this sort of 20 years of 20 to 40, that's the full-on adulthood. 40 to 60, that's kind of the wisdom period. 60 to 80, that's the twilight period. And 80 to 90, if you're still alive, is, whatever. So that...
And this is just such a great description. I just want to say that. I just want to say this is such a great description because we often talk about the half nodal return, which is that 9 to 10 years old, which is exactly what you've said as like, let's talk about that's the full moon. That's the ecliptic full moon, right? Like that's our half nodal return when the south node is hitting our natal north node and north node, south node, right? So this is the half nodal. And often if we go back to that time when we were 9 or 10, that's the reclamation of our gifts as well. Like that's where like illumination. Hello, you've explained.
That's right.
Yeah, you've explained this being the full moon. If you take what Michael's saying with just, and I do want to side note that of course the moon has 8 phases, but we are working with these 4 pillars. Absolutely.
Yes, the 4 pillars. And that's why I call them pillars.
Yes, they're absolutely. And that full moon phase, which is our half nodal return and that reclamation is if you go back to then, what were you doing at that age? And I can tell you right now, that has something to do with your purpose. Mm.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. Now,
love this.
Every eclipse that we experience sets up this same 19-year cycle. I use the birth notion to illustrate the importance of the 4.5 or 5 year increments of it. And this is where the Saros cycle just gets so flippin' complicated, because every single eclipse creates the same 19-year four-pillar cycle, and it's overlapping. You could make yourself insane trying to make sense of the Saros cycle. But now and then it might be interesting. And I'm going to give you a personal story of my experience. The last time the North Node was in Taurus and the South Node was in Scorpio 19 years ago, that was the beginning of my explosion into my spiritual expansion. I had a Christ walk, a kind of egoless walk that lasted 18 months. I had a dark night of the soul came after that, but the eclipse, the first eclipse in Taurus and Scorpio in 2003, I was in the midst of this enormous phenomena-filled, crazy Kundalini awakening expansion. And I remember that eclipse because I went out to take a walk around the block. I couldn't. I had to come home because the sidewalk was like doing this. I was like, oh my God, I got to get home and meditate. And in that meditation, I had a phenomena where I got downloaded sort of the breath mechanism that I now work with. Like all of this energy went into my lungs. And then I was told, now you have to learn how to breathe with this. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Guess how long it took me to learn how to breathe into this thing that got downloaded? 10 years. 5 years after that eclipse was 2008. So 2003, crazy spiritual experience. I had been on a television show that got canceled, and suddenly it's like I didn't have any work. I didn't have enough clients to support myself. It was a bit of a crazy moment. And in 2008, at the first pillar of crisis, that was when my practice started to take off, and I was able to like really start making a living. 10 years later was 2010. No, 2013.
Yeah.
2013 was when I moved out of the house where I was being financially supported and was able to live on my own based on my business as a spiritual teacher. And I had mastery of the breath. Right. And then 5 years later after that was
2018.
That was the year I invested in my business, and I doubled it twice over 2 years through social media and marketing. That was 2018. And here we are back again. And that eclipse, that was one of the most profound experiences of my life, followed this 5, 10, 15-year culmination experience that you can do this with any eclipse season that feels really powerful. So that's something I want to both sort of offer to your folk, that like this Saros cycle is something that you can in fact work with and look at, and it'll make you insane if with all of that detail.
It will, but if you simplify it, it doesn't have to. Okay, like just simplify.
And because I have a relationship to this eclipse season and that one 19 years ago, it made sense to share the story because it's so specifically something I can tell very specifically. Right.
And it's the perfect depiction of that cycle, which you've just given us so easily to interpret just from birth to 20 to 40. So we can all do that now. That's easy to do on a nodal, on our own birth nodal. But now that you've explained that, we can now go to these, just think of it the next layer. That's right. Amazing.
So,
love that.
So now let's sort of transition to talking specifically about the transiting nodes. That is, at the beginning of this year, the transiting nodes moved into Taurus and Scorpio. You and I talked about this. I called it death and taxes, and
I called it the love and death nodal portal.
Yes, right, because towards love, Taurus, or suffer death, Scorpio.
And let's just be honest, it has exactly lived up to its name in
Holy
2022.
Mother of God. Yes, it has.
Yes, it has
It is
been
big.
a deep dive. We have been walking in the underworld with Pluto the entire fucking year. It has been crazy.
It's been crazy.
Yeah.
And we're not done because we're
No.
sort of talking about 2023 here.
Yes.
So we move into 2023 with the nodes still in Taurus and Scorpio. And then it's summertime. Well, winter for you. July, I have the date right here. I think it's July 17th.
Yeah, I've got July 18th for us down here in Australia. Yep.
So right there in the middle of July, the nodes are going to switch signs, and for the next 18 months, so half of the 23 and all of 24, we've got the north node, you know, in the sign of Aries and the south node in the sign of Libra. So always when we start looking at like what's the impact of the nodes changing signs, well, one thing that we know is that the eclipses will be in those signs. That's the point. Where the nodes are where the eclipses are. And since we know that eclipses are wildly transformational, that the sign that the nodes are in will tell us what's being transformed and how we're being pushed in one direction and away from another globally. We're all going to be moving towards action, movement, certainty of self. I am, and I know who I am, Aries. And, you know, it's not, we talk about Aries sometimes and that impulsive experience where there's a shadow of too impulsive, too fast, too young, too immature. But we're not talking about shadow of Aries in the North Node consciousness. It's pure Aries consciousness. So that the emphasis is going to be taking all of the wisdom of the last bunches of years. And it's like, now it's time to move and act and do and start things up, because Aries is the cardinal fire sign that initiates all action. Mars ruled, right? So if Venus has ruled our forward movement for the 18 months of 22 and half of 23, and we got a good dose of leading with love, now we're ready to lead with Mars. We wouldn't have done well leading with the planet of war if we didn't spend a year and a half of, you know, stewarding ourselves, you know, powerfully through love.
Great point. Great point.
Right?
Yeah.
And then if the South Node is moving into Libra, and that's the energy that we're moving away from, then we're certainly got to drop passivity, indecision, that a quality of sort of valuing peace over everything else to your detriment.
That's right.
Now we're in the shadow of the sign, right? In the South Node consciousness, we're not looking at Libra as beautiful harmony and balance and art and love. We're talking about, what are we moving away from? Anything that values peace and accommodation over self-awareness and movement. Libra would be like, oh, I can't do that. And Aries would be, I must.
Can't and must. Love that. They're two good words.
So one thing I also want to talk about both Taurus and Scorpio and the first 6 months of the nodes in Aries, in Aries and Libra, is how to work with transits from the North or the South node. Because I'm assuming many of your people know their charts.
Well, this is going worldwide, darling. So, you know, people might not know anything about their charts. Okay. So
well,
that's
for
the
those
cool thing
of you
too.
who do, I want to talk about what it is to have the North Node transit a planet or point, or what it's like to have the South Node transit a planet or point.
Perfect.
So the North Node is all about the movement forward and what the world and the collective is ready for. Like, what's prescient now? What's the now thing? So that if the North Node crosses a point or a planet in your chart, the consciousness of that planet is now expressing a kind of a readiness to be pushed into the world more powerfully. The example I like to give to this that makes everybody get it right away is that when the North Node of the moon crossed my midheaven, which is work and career point, that was the year of my first book deal. right?
Mm.
The world was ready to receive my professional consciousness, and the world reflected that.
Yeah.
The South Node, when the South Node transits a planet, it's a little bit like a visit from what my dad used to call the honey dipper. The honey dipper was the guy with the truck who came to your septic tank and hooked up his hose and sucked all your family's poopy out.
Okay.
So
that's not something that I think that we really know about here in Australia.
well, maybe you don't have septic tanks, but
yes.
the point is that the South Node has the capacity to dump, to leave, to excoriate, to remove, to abrade off. So, in fact, there's a way that the North Node is sometimes called the dragon's head, and the South Node is called the dragon's tail, because it's the behind the thing, and the head is the forward moving thing. And so the South Node transiting a planet or a point can be thought of as like the dragon swiping his tail across that planet's consciousness, getting rid of anything that's necessary. Like my Neptune is in Scorpio in the 11th house, which is public community and circles that constellate around you, and it's the planet of spiritual connection, which makes sense for me. I'm a spiritual teacher. This is a good placement to have in my chart, but it's also a point that reflected my struggles with addiction earlier in life, because Neptune also rules addiction. So the South Node sort of sweeping past my Neptune this year is sort of clearing out anything and everything that would have been a shadow of me receiving the projections from the world, coming to me as a spiritual teacher, because I'm done with all of the lessons of humility that I had to learn through humiliation in the past. Right? So the South Node sweeps things away, the North Node points. So one of the things that's going to happen is that from right now until the nodes change signs, so like between now and say next summer, winter for your folks, the nodes are right now at 13 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio. That means between now and July, they're going to move backwards from 13 degrees of North Node in Taurus, South Node in Scorpio, to 0 degrees in July. So if you have any planet or points in Taurus or Scorpio, 13 or below, between now and next July, the North Node is going to be pushing some of that consciousness out into the world, ready to be received. And if you have anything from 13 to 0 of Scorpio, the planetary consciousness is going to receive an opportunity to let go of things that inhibit its fullest expression. And then from July to the end of next year, the nodes will be at 30 degrees in July because they move backwards. And by the end of the year, they hit 21. So that means if you're listening to this and you have any planets at 21 to 30 degrees of Aries, then the North Node is going to cross that point sometime between next summer. Sorry, I keep saying summer. Next July,
yeah,
to the end of the year. And same thing, if you have any Libra planets from 30 to 21, you are going to be moving through some transiting experiences that allow release and clearing out of stuff based on those planet points.
Yeah. For us Pluto and Libra generation, get ready to rumble. We've got the South Node
coming to hit
our Pluto.
That's right. It's going to activate you guys in a very, very, very big way.
Yes, absolutely. The South Node on Pluto is very big. Amazing. I think that that's such a great depiction and description, not just, going into, oh, it's going to be in this sign from this date, these are the eclipses. It's like, no, this is giving us some meat and something to chew on.
Yes,
and
something to do, some work
yeah,
to do.
something to do, exactly, to really follow these cycles, and definitely go back and look at our own nodal Saros cycle, and of course start this new one. Have a look at what was happening for you 19 years ago.
That's
when
right.
you know
That's
to start
right.
again.
Go back 19
Yes,
years to the eclipses of
exactly.
Aries and Libra from 2005 and 6.
That's exactly right, and start to map out that cycle again.
Woo-hoo!
That was so informative as usual,
So fun,
Michael.
Jerry.
So fun, so awesome, such great information. Thank you so much for coming on and giving us your time. I'm sure everyone enjoyed that as much as me. Thank you all. Thank you so much, Michael. And I wish you an amazing 2023. And for all of our listeners out there, another wonderful, wonderful interview with one of my favorite astrologers. So I hope you enjoyed it. Go and map out your own eclipse cycles and enjoy 2023. Thank you so much. Bye.